after World War I, there were 5 main treaties created. Now, everybody knows about the Treaty of Versailles mainly, because that was the big one that affected Germany, caused them to have all the guilt for World War I, the one that arguably caused World War II, so most people know about it. But there's 4 more that most people usually don't know about, called the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, the Treaty of Neuilly-sur-Seine, the Treaty of Trianon, and the Treaty of Sèvres. Now, honestly, I believe some of these treaties to be even more unfair than the Treaty of Versailles, if you can believe it. It affected the Central Powers that were involved with Germany in the war, namely Austria, Bulgaria, Hungary, and the Ottomans. So, let's start off with the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye and how unfair that was. It mainly affected Austria, and again, we can just presume this for all of the treaties. Well, not presume, but just like know that for all of these treaties that their delegations were excluded from negotiations. They weren't allowed to be negotiating with the big 3. And they had to just sign it, otherwise there would be no peace. And there would be war, and their country would basically be destroyed. They were basically forced to sign these things. So Austria lost more than 60% of their land. Now, the whole reason they wanted to do this was to divide it along ethnic boundaries. But they made a lot of assumptions in this. They assumed all minorities wanted to leave Austria, including some German-speaking pockets of people. They couldn't do anything with Germany except with consent of the League of Nations. Now, I believe that this treaty had some ulterior motives in hoping not to create a state of Austria-Germany. They were deathly afraid of that happening, and they created this treaty to help, separate the countries and not allow them to join up and become an even greater power. The thing that confuses me the most about this treaty is that it has a clause in it that says the Austrians have to accept responsibility of the war, which confuses me because of the war guilt clause in the Treaty of Versailles. If the Germans had to accept sole responsibility of the war, then why does Austria have to accept responsibility for the war in another treaty? That just doesn't make sense to me. Now, let's move on to the second treaty, which honestly I believe to be the most fair of them, but still not completely fair. The Treaty of Neuilly-sur-Seine, which mainly affected Bulgaria. There were Bulgarian majorities given to Serbia, and that's completely unfair. It's not along ethnic boundaries if you have a Bulgarian majority. If you have a Bulgarian majority, you should keep it with Bulgaria. It's not that hard, honestly. There's an area in Bulgaria called Western Thrace that actually had more Muslims, Turks, than Greeks. Why didn't they give it to Turkey? They gave it to Greece. Why didn't they give it to Turkey? If this was actually built along ethnic boundaries, they would have given it to Turkey. But unfortunately, it was just about buffering the Allied side's own land, and not actually about causing peace. Now let's move on to another treaty, the Treaty of Trianon, and now we're getting into a bit of unfair territory. This treaty mainly affected Hungary. It got rid of 78% of their land. They were supposed to split it along ethnic boundaries. If they did that, then why were 31% of Hungarians left outside Hungary? 31% of Hungarians left outside Hungary. That's not ethnic boundaries at all. That's basically 1/3 of the population left outside the country. That's not fair at all. It left Hungary with no ports. And again, this was not negotiated, but forced upon them. They decided that Austria and Hungary should be contained by a ring of countries to disallow them from communicating with the rest of the Central Powers. This was not built on peace. This was built on not letting them gain their strength again. You should leave them happy with the terms, not sad and unhappy. Now, the treaty beneficiaries actually spoke out about some of these issues. They were like, hey, are you sure these fair? But the big 3 were like, nah, it's cool. Their delegates just kind of waved them off. And a thing that confuses me about this treaty as well is that the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes was basically a post-war Austria-Hungary, but on the Allied side. It was a bunch of, it was a whole bunch of minorities stuffed into a country like some kind of bastard piñata. Post-Trianon Hungary produced 500% more agricultural goods than it needed. And it left other countries without their agricultural needs met. By splitting Austria-Hungary like this, it left a lot of countries having to become independent themselves and left a lot of unemployment, and being forced to drop and add different kinds of production. Now we move on to the last treaty, the Treaty of Sèvres, which this treaty disgusts me. It mainly affected the Ottomans. Britain and France were butthurt by their defeat in the Gallipoli campaign, and this is where the promises handed out by Britain comes into play. They went back in Hussein McMahon correspondence. I suppose they thought by creating the mandates, or as they call them, the trans-independent countries, they were sort of fulfilling both deals, the one with France and the one with Hussein. But honestly, these mandates were just a disguised colony. And the thing about this treaty is Greece didn't even accept the borders. They didn't even really accept the land given to them. They didn't sign this treaty. Yet, they went through with it anyway. It's just more proof that the treaty was so stupid, because they had to eventually create a Treaty of Lausanne to fix their mistakes, because the Turks would rebel in the future. The Allied powers had total control over Ottoman banks, and that doesn't make sense to me, because how does controlling someone else's economy somehow cause peace to be prevalent in Europe? It doesn't. It just allows them to not progress as much. They were watched like kids in a daycare to make sure that they were following the military clauses in their country. You know, like there were British and France people in the countries watching over, making sure that they were following it. They lost more than 70% of their land. In my mind, this was a treaty for Britain and France to get their grubby hands over the dying carcass of the Ottoman Empire. A way to carve up the sick man of Europe like a pumpkin. These treaties forced countries to pay too much, forced them to give up unfair land borders. And the key word here is forced. Nothing in these treaties were fair. At all. These treaties were driven by revenge and not long-term peace.